Hey guys, happy Wednesday, April 22nd, and I hope that your week is going well. I hope that the writing of the form poetry went well for you. And today we're going to talk about the second type of form poetry, which is form poetry that relies on structural rules. We're going to cover three: the sonnet, the villanelle, and blank verse. There are tons more um, that you probably know. Haikus, that's the 575, usually about nature poem from Japanese tradition. There is the limerick, which has a rhythmic and rhyming requirement, um, and lots of others. But we're going to study three because they are, I think, three of the most important and most traditional in that kind of, and most academic. Limericks are fun because they're funny, and haikus. You guys like them because they're short. But anyway, we're going to look at those three types of poems, and then you're going to choose one of the types of poems to write. And I'll give you more instruction here in a minute when we flip to the notes, but go ahead and make sure you have the notes out. And however you're going to do that, similar to yesterday, either have pencil and paper, make a copy of the notes so that you can write in the speaker notes section, whatever you want to do for those notes. And then, just as a quick reminder for tomorrow, don't forget that you have a reading day and a discussion board topic you are posting, and then you will also respond to a post. So that may mean that you'll have to check back later if you're one of the first posters. So, yeah, so you won't have very many to respond to if you're one of the first few. Okay, so just don't forget to do that. Okay, so we're going to flip around and go over the note. Okay, guys, here we are. I'm going to talk about types of form poetry, looking at structural forms. So, same as yesterday, it doesn't matter how you take your notes. If you want to take a brief moment to read a Shakespearean translation of the Eminem song Lose Yourself, it's quite humorous for literary geeky types. Okay, so structural forms are when the way you write matters, not the content. So it's not like you have rules about what it's supposed to say necessarily. There is one exception to that we'll talk about, but for the most part, it's just the form of it that's important. Another quote on poetry: poetry is the clear expression of mixed feelings. And that's by W.H. Auden, who is a famous poet. He wrote a great poem called The Unknown Soldier. And it's really good. So if you like war and you like poetry, you might want to look him up. Or Unknown Citizen, not soldier. Okay, so we're going to look at three types: sonnets, villanelles, and blank verse. And like I said, there's a ton more types, but we're only going to look at these three. Okay, so the basic rules of a sonnet are that it's 14 lines long. It is written in iambic pentameter, which we've talked about before. It's 10 syllables in each line, but more specifically, it has a rhythm to it. Ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. Okay, so that's how it's supposed to sound, how it's supposed to be read. And then also there is a specified rhyme scheme. There are lots of different types of sonnets, but probably the two most popular are the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan. The Shakespearean is what you are familiar with. You had to memorize those at the beginning of the school year. It's 3 quatrains, and remember, a quatrain is a 4-line stanza, and that has a topic of one theme. It's any theme, but it all has to do with the same theme. And then one couplet, and that provides a twist ending. And we talked about that before. But the 3 quatrains and the couplet make your 14 lines, and the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. And then again, the G, G is that couplet. Then the other kind is a Petrarchan. which isn't as popular, but there's still quite a few out there. And that consists of an octave and a sestet, an octave being 8 lines, a sestet being 6 lines. And in the octave, the poet presents a problem, and the sestet resolves that problem or provides a possible solution. The rhyme scheme is usually A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E. However, you can look this up online if you want. There are several alternate rhyme patterns for the sestet. Sometimes it's C, D, C, C, D, C, and it's just there's a lot of them. And I don't know why it isn't as structurally sound as the Shakespearean, because the Shakespearean has to have that rhyme scheme or it's not a Shakespearean sonnet. But that's the way it is. I don't know the explanation as to why, but sometimes it does differ. Now, since you're very familiar with the Shakespearean sonnet, I've provided you with an example of a Petrarchan sonnet. This is another one of my favorite poems. This is by Paul Laurence Dunbar. He was a Columbus, Ohio native, and there's actually a National Historic Museum in Columbus dedicated to him. But anyway, this is about Frederick Douglass, the famous abolitionist. Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote this in the early 1900s, so Douglass was no longer alive, and he this was well past slavery. Okay, so we're talking about civil rights issues, not slavery issues, but he compares the two, and he calls on Douglass, which, if you recall, since this is written to a dead person, we would call this an apostrophe. So I'll read it to you. Ah, Douglass, we have fallen on evil days, such days as thou, not even thou, didst know, when thee the eyes of that harsh long ago saw salient at the cross of devious ways, and all the country heard thee with amaze. Not ended then the passionate ebb and flow, the awful tide that battled to and fro, we ride amid a tempest of dispraise. Now when the waves of swift dissension swarm, and honor the strong pilot lieth stark, oh, for thy voice high-sounding o'er the storm, for thy strong arm to guide the shivering bark, the blast-defying power of thy form to give us comfort through the lonely dark. So the problem that Dunbar presents in the octave is that times are really tough. And, we thought bad times would be over when slavery ended, but that isn't the case. And then the sestet provides some kind of solution in that he is calling upon Douglass to teach them how to make things better, to give them comfort through the lonely dark so they don't get discouraged. You see the rhyme scheme: days, ways, and dispraise. Rhyme, no, ago. Oops, I missed one, but you get my sense there. Sorry, I don't want to start all over again. And then in the sestet, you have swarm and storm and form that rhyme, and stark and bark and dark that rhyme. Okay, so you've got that rhyme pattern. And there you go. There's also some extended metaphor in this as well. The tempest, or that's a fancy word for a storm, is the struggle for the African Americans to adjust to post-Civil War, post-slavery. There is a reference to a ship, shivering bark. Ships were often called barks because they were made out of wood. And that is the African American people are the ship. But anyway, so that's a Petrarchan sonnet. Up next, we're going to look at a villanelle. It is 19 lines long. It has 5 tercets. That's a 3-line stanza. Remember, I told you usually you don't have those because rhyming usually goes in even numbers. but this does have 5 tercets and then 1 quatrain. Throughout the entire poem, there are only 2 rhyming sounds, so you've got to really think ahead when writing these kinds of poems, because you need to pick sounds that have a lot of words that rhyme with it. And the rhyme scheme is there. The tercets are ABA, and then the quatrain is ABAA. And it doesn't stop there. There are more rules. It also contains 2 refrains that repeat in a pattern. So in this first tercet, this is a refrain, this A is a refrain, and this is a refrain. And this A repeats here, and this A repeats here, and then it starts over again. This is the first refrain, this is the second refrain, and then they both repeat here. Now, it's hard to show you on just the rhyming pattern, so I'm going to show you an actual poem. This is by Dylan Thomas, and this is a picture of Dylan Thomas. The poem is "Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night." And as soon as it loads here, I will read it to you. Thomas wrote this to his father, who was dying, and Thomas was young-ish when his father died, and so it was difficult for him. I mean, I don't think it's ever probably very easy for you to lose your father, but when you're young, it is especially hard, I would think. So notice the night, light, right, night, bright, blah, 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 all those first sounds, that A rhyme, and then the B rhyme is day, they, bay, way, gay, pray. Now let's look at the refrains before we read the poem. Do not go gentle into that night repeats here. Do not go gentle into that good night. Doesn't repeat here, but it repeats here. Do not go gentle into that good night. Doesn't repeat there, but then it's there again. Then the second refrain is rage, rage against the dying of the light, which repeats here and here, and then is also the last line of the poem. So it is a challenging poem to write, because you've got to pick phrases that will fit in all those different places. So I'll read this to you so you can get kind of an idea of Thomas's writing style. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So very impressive way that he incorporates those refrains so that you almost don't even notice that they're there. He even uses some enjambment occasionally, like here, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. So it's not even by itself as a sentence or a phrase, it is tied with the previous thought, which is kind of cool. Another thing that'll blow your mind about Dylan Thomas, this isn't a requirement for a villanelle, but he wrote this also in iambic pentameter, which is crazy pants. All right, the last one we're going to look at is blank verse. There's only one rule. It is written in iambic pentameter, and that's it. That's the only rule for blank verse. Now, don't get blank verse and free verse confused. Blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter, so there's no rhyme to it. Free verse is unrhymed, but there is no prescribed rhythm. So that's the difference between blank and free verse. Neither of them rhyme, but blank verse does have iambic pentameter. Now, I'm not going to read this entire poem to you because it's quite long. This is William Cullen Bryant, and he wrote the poem Thanatopsis. He wrote this when he was very young. He was a young teenager, probably around your age. And he wrote this shortly after the death of his mother. And it is kind of about how you don't need to be afraid of death. And he goes through different reasons why you shouldn't be afraid of death. But I'm going to read the first few lines here and kind of emphasize the iambic pentameter. This isn't really the way you would read it, but I want you to kind of hear the rhythm specifically, okay? To him who in the love of nature holds communion with her visible form, she speaks a various language. For his gayer hours, she has a voice of gladness and a smile, okay? Now that's emphasizing the iambic pentameter, but notice he has a lot of enjambment. And that's very common in blank verse because you have to have exactly 10 lines. You don't always get to express yourself in one thought in 10 syllables exactly. So I'll read it a little bit better here for you. To him who in the love of nature holds communion with her visible forms, she speaks a various language. For his gayer hours she has a voice of gladness, and a smile and eloquence of beauty, and she glides into his darker musings with a mild and healing sympathy that steals away their sharpness ere he is aware. Okay? Some internal rhyme there, but that's kind of a glitch, not on purpose, or at least it's not a pattern. Okay, so those are your form poems. Now it's your turn. Choose one of the types of form poetry to write. Even though we don't have class on Friday, I'm going to give you until Friday to turn it in because these can be more difficult. Just make sure you label the type of poem and the necessary rules, and don't worry about labeling the poetic devices because that'll probably get too crowded on the page. Okay, guys, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you in the meeting.